Good morning, everybody. So nice to see so many people here in person. Welcome, everyone. I am Cindy Yee Bradbury. Actually, I'm not Cindy Yee Bradbury. I am, unfortunately, I am standing here in her stead. She became ill and is not able to be here, which is crushing on many levels. She has devoted her life to organizing this meeting, along with Tom Rodabaugh and Bob Levenson, and so this is soul-crushing for her. So if you have a moment, send her a note, tell her how much we miss having her here with us. So I will be a weak stand-in for Cindy to welcome you all and orient you to what we hope to achieve over the next couple of days. So the idea for this meeting actually began in 2019. It was a conversation that Cindy and Bob and Alan Kraut had together. And then, like many things that began in 2019, they had to be put on the shelf for a bit. But now, here we are. The idea was to have an in-person meeting because of the nature of the topics that we're going to be discussing, and to have opportunities for fluid conversations, both within this large setting, within informal settings, and within our work groups. What began as just a conversation became a reality, and many people stepped up to help sponsor this event here. And so there are many departments, many organizations, programs, individuals. They joined with the Academy of Psychological Clinical Science to co-sponsor this event. And the meeting really wouldn't have been possible without all of this terrific sponsorship. And I just want to say a particular shout out to Tom here at Washington University St. Louis, and the staff here at the Eric P. Newman Education Center, or EPNEC, I think as it's called, and graduate students who are doing a lot of heavy lifting to make this all come together for us all today. So please, if you could just take a minute to thank Tom, the students, and the staff. The second group that's been working on this meeting is a summit planning committee, which includes Tom, Bob, and Cindy. Most of the three of them did a lot of the heavy lifting, but there are other people from several key stakeholder groups, including Joanne Davila, who's representing PC-SAS, Kathy Gruss from APA, me, I'm representing APS, Annette Stanton, who's representing COGDOP, Tim Strauman, CUDCUP, and Tracy Thomas from LaCroix and Milligan Associates, who provided a lot of expert support and consultation throughout the planning process for this meeting. Together, the Summit Planning Committee identified themes and topics for discussion based on your input. There was a survey that was sent out, you may remember. And many of us are going to serve as moderators during sessions when we break out into work groups. There we're going to work together to identify key questions, summarize ideas and action items that emerge from each work group, and then share summaries when we all come together to reconvene as a single group. So the general format for our summit will be, we'll have some introductory remarks by Bob Levenson here, setting the stage to help us think about some challenges and opportunities facing clinical science in the field. Then we'll have 4 thematic half-day sessions, each consisting of an initial talk addressing the overarching theme for the session. And then you'll join your pre-assigned work groups, and those are in the program, along with the room numbers, to then address some of the key questions that are covered by each work group and generating ideas for moving us forward on these topics. Each group has an assigned scribe who will be taking notes on the work group's discussion, and ideally we'll identify 1 or 2 members from each work group who will serve as a touchstone when we break into small groups this afternoon to discuss the next steps. Then we'll come back together and share brief reports from each of the work groups. So here are the room locations in case you haven't had a chance to wander around this beautiful facility. So we were just out there having breakfast. This is the auditorium. That probably goes without saying, but the breakout groups that are not in the auditorium are going to be up on the 3rd floor. So if you go out, you'll see the escalator will take you up to the 2nd floor. A set of stairs will take you up to the 3rd floor. There's also an elevator that will go all the way to the 3rd floor to take you up to where those rooms are. Our coffee breaks will be out in the lobby. The lunch that will be served today will be in the great rooms. So after you exit the auditorium, you take a left and you'll see the great rooms. And that's also true for the dinner this evening. The restrooms are on the right as you exit the auditorium, and there are restrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floors as well. So as you can see from our agenda, we've got a very packed agenda. Lots of things that are going to happen. We're optimistic we're going to achieve a lot. So I mentioned that everybody was pre-assigned to these work groups, and so that's where a lot of our hope for action items is going to come from. And so it probably goes without saying, but one of the most important components of the meeting is everybody sitting in this room, you. What we all do together in these work groups is really going to set the stage for moving us all forward on some of these challenges and opportunities that the field faces. So in our work groups, we want to hear from everybody. We want to listen, we want to hear from each other, we want to hear about many different ideas from different perspectives, and when there are disagreements, we want to agree to disagree respectfully. So just some overarching ground rules for what we'd like to do within these work groups is there are probably 25 or 26 people in each work group, and they're about 50 minutes long. So that means everybody would have about 2 minutes to speak. So we want to share the air, give everybody an opportunity to share an idea. The 3x3 rule, many of you have heard of this before, so either wait until 3 people speak or 3 minutes until you speak again. We really love to hear from everybody to the extent that we can. And we're facing some challenges, no question, but we're hoping not to spend our time together airing the problems, but really focusing on solutions. So raising a problem, then throw out an idea for a solution. That's what we're hoping we can all do together. We realize that there are multiple ways to achieve our goals for clinical science training, and yet there also needs to be some consensus about allowing us to move forward with these divergent pathways and goals. So here are the 4 overarching themes. These are also in the program. These will require reflection, contemplation, and we hope bold thinking outside of the box to help us move forward on some of these issues. In this room today, we have past, present, and emerging leaders in clinical science who represent different voices and perspectives while sharing one common goal: to make clinical science training as strong and as relevant as possible for now and, importantly, into the future. So let's make the most of our time together today and tomorrow to consider how to best train the next generation of our doctoral students so that they possess the skills and experiences needed to have a significant and positive influence on pressing issues in science, practice, leadership, and policy, both in the present and again as into the future. This is an opportune moment for us to rethink how clinical science training programs can address some of these issues. Structural and systematic racism, of course, is critically important for us to consider and foster progress towards greater equity and social justice. The challenges set forth for us are not trivial, but our work together has considerable potential to magnify our impact as we move forward. And so with that, what I'm going to do is invite Bob Levenson to come up, and he'll give us some thoughts on some of the challenges and opportunities that face clinical science. Bob?
And special thanks to Ann for stepping in for Cindy at the last minute. So I'm, in this talk, I'm going to talk about how we got here and some of the things that I think drove the development of these themes. And first, has to be the case, a little bit of history. It's been 77 years since the VA and the U.S. Public Health Service started funding clinical psychology graduate training programs. And you can take a look at some of these other events. APA has been accrediting these programs for 76 years. Somewhere in the 1990s, a number of things happened. Dick McFall wrote an influential paper, the Manifesto, where I think it was in 91, where he sort of articulated some of the vision for clinical science. The Academy of Psychological Clinical Science began, and so this clinical science has officially been part of our agenda for 28 years now. PC-SAS accreditation began 16 years ago, and we're here today. So on the one hand, you might think we've sort of got this. We've been doing it for 3/4 of a century. And in truth, it's really remarkable where we stand. The number of programs, the way that they're evaluated, the quality control that we maintain through our accreditors, the treatments that have been developed during this 75 years, both within our field and in adjacent fields. It's really been a remarkable period of time. But we also have some worrisome signs and some cracks and fissures that are appearing, I think, and I'm going to talk about some of them today. I just want to remind you that that was sort of my task, and that this is not the whole story, but it's the worrisome part of the story, and there's a lot that we can feel good about. So this is a phrase you hear a lot about moving the needle, and I think to me what it means is that we need to keep our eye on the largest aggregated public health data to indicate how we're doing in relieving the burden of mental illness. And this is as recent as I could find, the data on two really huge social problems. One is the treatment of breast cancer going back to 1999, and these are deaths per 100,000 people. The y-axis is different on the two of them, but I think you get the idea. The other one is suicide, whereas breast cancer treatment has reduced the number of deaths through incredible advances in genotyping tumors and recognizing precision medicine, recognizing the best treatment for different kinds of breast cancer. We see this almost unrelenting increase in suicide. There was a little dip during COVID, but by 2021 it was back up again. And you know, you've heard these kinds of horrible things, but in the United States alone, there's one suicide every 11 minutes. I forgot to start the timer on my talk, but I mean, by the time I finish, there will have been 3 people who took their lives in this country. How do we move the needle on these kinds of problems? You know, and what is our obligation to be accountable for them? Suicide is just one thing that I could have shown. The incidence or prevalence, of autism is another thing that's shown the same kind of increase. But with suicide, there's less argument about, you know, is the measure good? And so, but everywhere you look, there's this kind of a need to move the needle in the other direction. Surprisingly, there's not a lot of data that you would think we could turn to where we measured the burden of mental illness in representative populations using common measures at different points in time. That kind of data, which is what you would like to have, very rare. Data that are available, like through the Michigan Survey Research Center, that was done over a 20-year period, shows no evidence of reduction in the incidence, prevalence of mental illness. So there's just, I'm sure in a room like this, there are 10 people who can say, but I know another data set. But I think we can probably agree that this is a worrisome sign. So I'm going to organize my talk in terms of challenges and opportunities. And the first challenge, I think, is how do we disseminate what we know? And we know a lot. And here are some of the worrisome signs. I thank my colleague Allison Harvey for these references. The typical delay between symptom onset and receiving appropriate treatment can be up to 6 to 8 years for mood disorders and 9 to 23 years for anxiety disorders. We know what to do, but we're not getting them out quickly enough to the people in need. The U.S. Public Health Service estimates that about 20% of the young people with mental disorders are receiving appropriate mental health services at any time. So what is the opportunity here for us when we think about the implications of these figures and these fissures for our training? Well, first of all, do we need to really seriously make dissemination science, and there is such a thing. I was not educated in it when I was in graduate school, and I'm training my students in it, a larger part of our clinical science training. I mean, these are the kinds of things we want to talk about in our meeting. How do we share the good stuff? I mean, we've got some great treatments, and we've had some fine refinements on them, but how do we get them out to the people who are currently underserved and may be in the greatest need? The second challenge is developing new treatments and improving existing treatments. You have to ask yourself, if we had 100% perfect dissemination of everything we know, how much would that move the needle? It's not known, it's unknowable. Experts I've talked to about this mostly say not much, because we really do need a lot more in our arsenal. Also, there's some worrisome signs, like this was a paper that came out in 2015 that took one of our really, really good stuff treatments, CBT for depression, and showed that both in terms of reducing symptoms and reducing remission rates, the effect sizes really declined over time. And so these treatments worked a lot better early on than they did 15 years later. And some of that may be due to problems with fidelity, problems with moving the treatments, scaling them out into more diverse communities. But that's one of our best treatments, and so this is a worrisome indicator. This is a paper that John Weiss did at UCLA a number of years ago, where he found that the effectiveness of most of the good stuff, our empirically validated therapies, decreases as the distance from research university-based clinics increases. So as we get away from our highly educated, sort of sophisticated, affluent populations that come into our clinical trials and, in our university centers, we find, and I think any of you who've done this kind of scaling of research finds that, it doesn't work as well. There are a lot of tweaks that we wish we had done. There's a lot of attrition and a lot of difficulty getting people to sign up for studies and for treatment programs. So these are some of the concerns that really say, we need another bolus of new science and new treatments and better treatments and treatments that are more generalizable, and that's going to be a challenge for training. I think the opportunities are remarkable. I think we need to continue increasing our emphasis on treatment development and treatment evaluation in clinical science training, probably more broadly, not just in the treatment development lab, but so everybody gets some. These are extraordinarily exciting times in terms of new discoveries in other areas of psychological and medical science. We've been running 3 job searches at Berkeley the last year, and in addition to being really tired, you hear some wonderful ideas coming from people who aren't really in the mainstream of clinical psychology. Recently hearing about the use of psychedelics as a way to reopen kind of learning windows where things that were learned earlier in life might be relearned in different ways, and applying this to trauma-based syndromes like PTSD and things like that. So as I heard this, I was sitting there thinking about this work, and I was thinking, do I have the skills to know whether this is a breakthrough or just nonsense? And I think that's a question for us, is how do we, this group that we're training, they're going to be dealing with these kinds of possible breakthroughs coming from all sorts of different areas. And they need to be ready to be smart and good consumers and appliers of this new exciting knowledge. And as I was saying, we need to stress test our treatments so that they work with more diverse and distant populations. Anne has already said a major theme for this meeting is reducing systemic racism and promoting equity and inclusion. And we are awash in indications that this is something that I think we all probably would say we were trying really hard, but it didn't work. We are left with systems that are not working as well as we can. So these are three things that, one is from the 1990s, Sandra Graham's paper where she looked at research in APA journals and concluded that most of the subjects were white and middle class. And now, 20 plus years later, we have these two really impassioned and I've just really thought-worthy and articles talking about racism in clinical science and how clinical science can and should assume a more active anti-racist stance. For those of you who don't know, this is the Sandra Graham work where the journals are on the right, and she was looking at the number of articles that talked about, used African-American subjects or talked about African-American problems. And you can see, starting in 1970 and going forward, that both the number of articles and the percentage of the total articles was declining over that period. And then thanks to Keenan Joyner, who shared this paper with me last week, this is a paper by Ginther and colleagues that shows that there's at least a 10% difference in the amount of NIH R01s awarded to African American applicants, even if you control for everything imaginable besides race, and there is still this deficit. And this is, of course, now we're not back in Sandra Graham's time. We're 25 years after that. The opportunities, I mean, I think we're all thinking about this, but we have to have difficult discussions. This is not easy. We need to share the microphone and listen. It can't just be people who are senior, white, people like me, can't be doing all the talking. We need to recognize the diversity in diversity. I've been talking a little bit about diversity around race, but we have gender, and we have sexual identification, and we have all the intersections. And these have enormous impact in what we study. One of the findings in the NIH work is that the topics that African American researchers apply to study are not as highly valued and not as thought to be as funding worthy. So this is the systemic part. It's in what we study, what we decide to treat, what we see the problems are, what we read, the scholars whose work we read and assign in our classes, and what we think is important. So there's a lot to do here, and that's why it's an important theme in our meeting today. I have to mention this one, but I'm embarrassed that I don't know what to do about it. It's been an issue for all of my career, but we have a lot of nosologies that are fighting for our attention, and the DSM-5, which we had hopes for, and I think they actually did a lot of good work in the background, but in the final version, a lot of it was relegated to the appendices. I don't have to tell you about the problems, with the comorbidities and the It's not very useful in the super heterogeneity in syndromes. And now we have just three that I'm thought of, when I was putting this talk together. We had RDoC, which had a moment in the sun and then kind of has dropped off the radar a little bit. HiTOP, I don't know if you follow that, but this is a factor analytic approach to coming up with syndromes by applying big data methods to symptoms. And then the whole transdiagnostic process, which sort of has the idea that there are things that you treat that really aren't specific to syndromes, but they occur in many, like sleep and whatnot, and that maybe should be the science. And this has been an enormous impediment to our research, our practice, and our public health planning. We don't really know what it means when the rate of autism, the prevalence goes up, by 50-fold, 50% over a period of time, because we don't know whether we're measuring one disease or many of diseases. And I don't have to go through this with you, but we need to develop a robust and effective way of classifying the phenomena we study, diagnose, and treat. And maybe this is just my own burnout because it's been an issue for so long. Maybe we need to get fresh eyes on this and start again. But it seems to me we're moving in two directions. One towards syndromes, the DSM approach, and the other towards symptoms and processes. And I think the other thing we need to develop a science to help us sort this out, figure out which one is more useful for different needs. But right now we have this funny thing that's going on in our field. We're moving away from sort of syndromic precision medicine approaches and into a much more general, unified set of things that can be applied, across the board. So the tension in this is really palpable. We need to develop evidence-based clinical science training. When I got interested in this, it was back when a series of papers came out in the 80s and 90s that reviewed the effects of training. And I don't mean to say that this is the only work that's ever been done on this, but this was pretty sobering. In the Smith and Glass meta-analysis on therapy outcome, the years of therapist experience had zero correlation with the indicators of therapy outcome. And Joe Durlock did a study around then where he looked at 42 studies that compared professional and paraprofessional therapists and only found in one of those the professional therapists did better. I believe in 14 of them the paraprofessionals did better. And Christensen and Jacobson wrote this paper in the mid-1990s that was very influential, where they basically said under almost all conditions professional training and clinical experience may not add to the efficacy of psychotherapy. Like again, this is just part of the story. There's evidence on the other side. But I think, what we're talking about here can be sort of framed as a mediational question. We select our students on a number of characteristics, and we had these desired outcomes. And the idea is that the clinical science training, kind of amplifies those characteristics. Like they have, so these are what I think we do. We look at things like research experience, and then we give them research training, and then we expect that they'll be better researchers. And I think this is something, I think this is what Jennifer's going to say today too, but I can't speak for her, but that, we need to start testing that as a field. We need to find common metrics and collaborate and figure out what really works. And in this area, I think we have to re-examine our assumptions about what works. I mean, how many of you think it's a good idea to not start clinical students in their first year of seeing patients? How many of you think you should, How many of you think you should start them right out of the gate? How many of you think you should start with easy cases and then scale up to hard cases? We have these ideas. I argued very strongly in our program that we go from a general admissions to a mentor-centered admissions, and we've been doing that for 25 years. I don't know if that's the best way. I don't know if it works better. There's so many things that we just do because we think they work. And so we really need to think about more of an evidence base. It'll enable us to be more efficient and hopefully to have better outcomes. And if it turns out that that the non-mediated path works, like if it's really just a selection issue, I don't know about you, but I'm on vacation or something. I can do more research, but I just think that's where we really have to figure this out. And this is the group, and this is the time, I think, when we're ready to do that. And the last thing is, I added this because I've been thinking about it. There's an increasing tendency to view major societal problems as mental health problems. And the politics of this are fascinating because you hear people, on the right and the left, the blue states, and it's all, it's a mental health problem. And so, homelessness, the opioid crisis, gun violence are mental health problems. Well, what does this mean for us? Well, first of all, there's some huge misconceptions in this. A lot of people don't understand because a lot of serial killers have histories of mental illness. It does not mean that everyone with mental illness is going to be a serial killer. And the chances of this stigmatizing people, especially as the megaphones get bigger and louder and in more mouths on all sides of the political spectrum, I think this is really a challenge for our age. And I think underneath this, we have to ask ourselves, to what extent is it our job to do science in these areas? I mean, we've always sort of done what we wanted, but here we have these huge social problems that are crying for our wisdom and our opining in terms of the causes, the ways to prevent and treat. And are we going to train a generation of psychologists who can work in this space and can deal with the policymakers and the politicians? And it's a different world than the normal cloistered ivory tower. So I need your opinion on this. When I wrote the talk, I had a slide that said, "Are we forked?" Then I thought, that was really not a good idea. But I think we are forked. I just didn't want to have it in the talk. We are at a fork in the road. And we can stay the course. We can keep on trucking. We can rest on our laurels. We can do the things that we do so wonderfully. We can make that our life's work and mission. Or we can move on. And we can move on to something new in the areas where what we're doing may not be as good as we could do, and in the areas where we're not as much of a presence as we should be and could be, or we could be, and then it's up to us whether we should be. And this is all in service of that goal of clinical science training is at the heart of this. I mean, we are passing the torch generation by generation to people who are going to be dealing with these problems. And some of them we've done well with and some we haven't. And this training that we provide in our laboratories and clinics and classrooms and experience working with organizations and in the communities, that is going to determine what this next generation of scientists and practitioners and teachers and leaders and hopefully policymakers look like. So this is the fork, and these are the decisions. And obviously, I think those of you who invested your time and your travel dollars and your COVID risk in coming to this, I expect that many of you feel like we should be on that right side of the road and moving forward and not just standing still. And so, 74 years after the Boulder Conference, we hope this summit will enable us to find ways to work together, harness this collective talent and energy. We have training programs, we have accreditors, we have clients of the system, we have people who hire our graduates, we have policymakers in this. It's an unusual, and we have people who have played important historical roles in the development of the clinical science model. So we are sort of it, and I hope that we will use this time together to embrace these challenges, these opportunities, and really make some progress in these 4 important areas and in many others. Sort of an investment, a new beginning that we'll look back on with pride in the future years. So thank you very much.